Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilbee, the Phantom of the Opera of film criticism, and today, after a slightly lengthy hiatus for the month of November 2017, I am back. The hiatus was mainly because I have spent the last 3 weeks working on a BBC Two show. I'm not here to give it a massive plug. Of course, I'm completely biased because I've worked on it, but it's called The £1 Million Menu. It will be out in Q2 of 2018, I believe. It seems to be shaping up to be a pretty cool cooking, business, financial type reality show. It should be pretty good. It was fun to work on, but that is where I've been for the past few weeks, and as a result I've not been podcasting. They were very long hours. It was 6 days a week, and that seventh day of the week I often spent making sure that everything that I missed over the past 6 days was accounted for in terms of a social life, or in terms of just getting the logistics of my life and things moving. And also myself and my partner are hoping to be moving flat into a house in December, which should be a lot of fun. Fingers crossed that pulls through. We've had many false starts before over the past few months. Hopefully this one is the true one. Let's see how that goes. But let's start the podcast how we normally do, with a segment called Share the Love. And this is one where we're going to do something a little bit different for this segment. Normally I talk about video series or video personalities and things like that. People to promote who I think their work is very, very worthwhile. However, this one is going to be a podcast that I think is very worthwhile, and it is the Case Files True Crime Podcast. You can go listen to them on casefilepodcast.com, or look up Case Files on iTunes, or on whatever iTunes or podcast-related app that you can get on your smartphone devices, whether it's Apple or Android, whatever. You can look up Case Files. Basically, Case Files is a team of about half a dozen or so people who research and write and put together the episodes vary in length from about 30 minutes to sometimes about an hour and a half or 2 hours, where they take a look at true crime. And they've almost got 70 episodes under their belts. They've been doing these podcasts since early 2016, and they're currently on episode 68, which is Escape from Alcatraz. And some of the episodes that I highly, highly recommend, I've actually got the list of them in front of me right now. We've got Case 7, Julian Butchwald and Carolyn Watson. We have Case 9, Jonathan Luna. Case 12, Catherine Knight. Case 13, The Family Court Murders. Case 15, The Weepy-Voiced Killer. Case 17, The Erickson Twins. Case 18, The North Hollywood Shootout. Case 34, The Catholic Mafia. Case 37, The Yorkshire Ripper. That's a 3-part case file. Case 44, Peter Falconio. Case 49, The Moors Murders, another 3-parter. Case 50, Jennifer Pan, which is off the wall. That's like something that you'd get out of Gone Girl, that case. That one's insane. Case 51, Tina Watson. Case 59, Amy Lynn Bradley. That was the first episode I ever heard. And Case 60, Jonestown, another 3-parter. As is prudent to the subject matter, many of the episodes are not suitable for all listeners. They, of course, deal with real-life true crimes. Some of them involve crimes of a sexual nature, crimes involving children, crimes involving animals, and sometimes, depressingly, all of the above. But if you have the stomach for these type of stories, if you are interested in true crime at all, or interested in murder, crime, robberies, things like that, I highly recommend listening to Case Files. It's essentially a fact-based audio production, almost akin to a professional audiobook, where these people come together with an anonymous narrator who has not been given an actual official name on the website. He's just called Casey in his Australian dulcet tones. Narrates a factual-based account of all of the information that is public knowledge of these stories. So if you are interested in true crime or just really, really interesting factual-based stories, then please check out Case Files. There's links to their website and also to their information and things like that in the description below. I will say that the first few episodes of Case Files are just not that good. Not in terms of the stories that they tell. Some of them are very, very interesting, but the delivery is not great. Casey as a host is clearly still getting used to recording lengthy excerpts on the microphone. The audio is not great. However, give it 5 or 6 episodes and the audio production and the production values in general really, really ramp up. I recommend listening to a later episode. Basically from episode 20 onwards, and then if you are into it, then go through the entire back catalogue, including the earlier stuff, and just see how they improve over time. if you listen to episode 1 and you are disappointed and you do not like the quality, I urge you to stick with it or listen to a much later, much more recent story, and then that is much more indicative of the general quality of the episode. So be sure to check out Case Files. And now on to our feature presentation for this episode. We're going to be talking about the Universal Monsters, or more specifically, Universal's Dark Universe, Cinematic Universe, branch, banner, whatever you want to call it. Now, this was a story a few weeks back. This was something that was broke by the Hollywood Reporter on November 8th, and it was something that I did want to talk about almost immediately once I heard all the news. However, work and stuff got in the way, so we're talking about it now, and hopefully next week we'll talk about something much more topical and much more of the times, but I still think it's interesting and I just want to talk about it just as a general thought experiment, and also just to get more people's opinions, because I think this story kind of went a bit underneath the radar, considering that it is essentially the death of what was going to be a massive purported cinematic universe project to hopefully, fingers crossed, one day rival Marvel or DC. So this is a story from the Hollywood Reporter. I'll read it for the most part in its entirety, just to let you folks know what is going on. So, Universal's cinematic dark universe is in danger of being mummified. Just 5 months after Universal released a much-discussed cast photo promising a slew of movies starring the likes of Johnny Depp, Russell Crowe and Javier Bardem, none of the projects appear to have a pulse. Writers, producers Alex Kurtzman and Chris Morgan, who were hired as the Monster Universe architects, have departed the franchise, sources tell the Hollywood Reporter. Kurtzman, whose deal with Universal lapsed in September, is focusing on television, while Morgan has returned to the Fast and Furious franchise and is writing a spin-off for Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. In early October, Universal pulled the plug on pre-production that had started in London for The Bride of Frankenstein, which was to have followed The Mummy as the second entry in the series, partly because execs felt the script by David Koepp and overseen by director Bill Condon wasn't ready. Angelina Jolie had been courted for the lead, but is now not attached. Insiders insist Condon remains attached, but no date has been set to resume work, and a February 14th, 2019 release has been shelved. All this comes in the wake of The Mummy's poor performance. Released in June, the Tom Cruise picture grossed a relatively paltry $409 million worldwide, $409 million worldwide on a budget of $125 million plus. Some insiders place it considerably higher. Emblematic of Dark Universe's problems is the Tony office building on the Universal lots that was revamped at considerable expense for the new venture. After being decked out in monster regalia, it now sits mostly empty. Universal is exploring its options. One road involves offering the IP to high-profile filmmakers or producers, Jason Blum has been mentioned, with ideas for one-off movies not connected to a larger universe, and the studio could find a new architect who could overhaul the concept. So that's basically the potential end of the Dark Universe, because with what we've got is a very underperforming The Mummy film, some apparent issues with Bill Condon's The Bride of Frankenstein, and you have all of these stars attached in these potential projects to move forward, but they're just not in a comfortable position to do so, and it would seem that it's been shelved. And the Universal lot, the Dark Universe offices, which were apparently decked out in monster regalia and decorations and such, is now more or less vacant and no one is working in there anymore, after the producers and the writers, Alex Kurtzman and Chris Morgan, who were the spearheaded creatives who were at the front of this project, for example, just like Kevin Feige is for Marvel and Jeff Johns is for DC. Alex Kurtzman and Chris Morgan have apparently departed the Dark Universe. So yeah, what kind of went wrong here? It's The Mummy. The Mummy underperformed. The Mummy was not very well received. I'm guessing that the DVD and Blu-ray sales are not tracking particularly well. So what we have is now a universe that was set up, but nothing seems to be going to come from it, which is a shame, because I think that Bill Condon doing The Bride of Frankenstein could have been something quite interesting, especially if you could have got an interesting female lead like Angelina Jolie. But then again, Angelina Jolie did Maleficent, and while she was good in that project was an absolute train wreck, and for some reason it's getting a sequel, which absolutely baffles me. Personally, I find this to be really, really disappointing. I am a huge fan of the Universal Monsters films, from Dracula to Frankenstein, Creature of the Black Lagoon, and Invisible Man. It's an incredibly eclectic, dramatic and horror-filled universe of films from the 1930s, 40s and 50s, and what would happen is that many of the stars, for example, Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, they would often cross over, but they'll play multiple roles in these films, and even had the Hammer horror films in the 1950s, 60s and 70s with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, who would share a very similar approach where they would play multiple roles and they would overlap into each other's universes of these monster films, and it was absolutely awesome and so much fun and great, and there's so much potential to do this in the modern day, especially with modern day technology and modern production values. There is absolutely reason to do this. This is a incredibly diverse and great series of stories that can go into the very heart of the human condition, from the progenitor of science fiction with Frankenstein to romantic gothic horror like Dracula, and even monster stories or stories about man's hubris like The Invisible Man or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. These are great universally themed stories. So what went wrong here? And I think one of the main issues, apart from getting Alex Kurtzman, who is a historically bad storyteller, to be the guy who makes The Mummy, I think one of the big problems was opening this cinematic universe with a big action blockbuster. I think if I were doing this, if for some reason Universal came up to me and said, Trilbee, I would like you to make a reboot of the Dark Universe and the Universal Monsters, but what would you do first? What I would do first is that I would do a much smaller dramatic horror drama story. For example, I think that the best opening that you could do, if you had to make this into a cinematic universe, and this first movie had to lead into potential franchises or potential other spin-offs and such, I would start with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, make a $30 or $35 million picture, get a big, well-known lead star, not necessarily Russell Crowe, maybe somebody a little bit younger, but someone with big star power, or at least with great appeal. And if you get someone who is not necessarily a big name, then you fill the supporting cast with some big names as well to sort of bring in the audience. What you do is that you make that a self-contained Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story. If it was up to me, you would still make it a period film. You would set it in the original setting that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was in. We're talking mid to late 19th century, if I believe so. And then you go through this self-contained dramatic story about this man who has to fight his own darker impulses, and it's set in the backdrop of the late 19th century, so you could have some supernatural rumblings there where people do believe there's a supernatural occurrence happening, even though it is basically science. And then you have the story come to its natural conclusion, which could be the potential death of Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. And then you could even have like an end credit scene if you were so inclined, maybe showing that Dr. Jekyll did in fact survive and is trying to repress Mr. Hyde, or repress his desire to use the formula to use the vial or the experiments that causes him to transform. And maybe he's going to do something similar to what Prodigium did in The Mummy, and they would try and research evil. They would try and research the supernatural in order to try and better understand it. And that could lead into other stuff. Then you do a standalone, low to mid budgeted Frankenstein film or Dracula film. I think what you do is that you focus on the science first. You focus on the scientific aspects, such as the formula for the Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll storyline that causes them to transform. You focus on the science of reanimating corpses, like you do with Frankenstein's monster, and then you can go slightly further into more fantastical or into more the monsters. You do Creature from the Black Lagoon, you do Dracula, and then you just go full on supernatural for a potential team up film where you could do the Wolfman or you do the Mummy. And I think starting off with the Mummy in Universes, the Dark Universe, was such a weird way to go about it, because the Mummy is such a big, all-powerful, encompassing threat in that film that's able to essentially destroy London and raise the dead and create an undead mummy zombie army. But then, if you are doing a Dark Universe, then what is the end game? What are you building towards? Because the Mummy, I think, in the Universal Monsters Pantheon, is about as big a threat as you can get. It would be like having the very first Marvel MCU movie, having Iron Man fighting Thanos. Like, where do you go from that? If you have the very first DCEU movie, you have Batman fighting Darkseid. Like, where do you go? Like, sure, maybe if you dig much deeper, you can find other villains, such as Kang in the MCU, or Steppenwolf or Brainiac in the DCEU. But when you start that big, then everything else in comparison is going to seem relatively small until you get to that other peak. And I think that's a very poor way to structure the universe. I think the Mummy would be a great threat for everybody to unify against, because the Mummy is the big ultimate evil, especially the way that they portrayed the Mummy in the Tom Cruise Alex Kurtzman film from earlier this summer. I think the Mummy was the best part of that film, because she was this all-encompassing evil who was all-powerful, and she was given an incredible screen presence thanks to Sofia Boutella. And I think if she were to be the final endgame villain for a particular phase of the Dark Universe, that would be a very appropriate and very effective endgame. But as a beginning, as a starting point, I think she was very poorly handled. And one thing that could help this proposed reboot of the Dark Universe that I am tentatively pitching is, unless that there is going to be a big team-up film like that Mummy team-up that I proposed earlier on, then you keep the budgets low to mid-size. You do have to throw some money and production values at it if you want it to be a period piece or a period film with elaborate makeup effects and some CGI in here. But you want to keep it relatively low budget so that you don't have a risk of losing hundreds of millions of dollars like Universal may have done on The Mummy. You have a $35 to $50 million film, and that means you only have to make around $200 and $250 million at the box office in order to break even and make a profit. The risks are significantly lower, and if one of the films does end up not performing the way you want it to, then it's not nearly as big a loss, and you may have another smaller project in that mid-ranged budget to hopefully recoup those losses. It's just smarter financially to do so. But one thing that Universal could definitely stand to take a different approach on is who is going to be leading this universe, who is going to be the chief creative force. Because Alex Kurtzman and Chris Morgan, while on paper you can see them making sense, when you get into the finer details, you'll see that they are actually quite poorly suited to the material. Alex Kurtzman has made some of the, to put it bluntly, has been behind some of the worst blockbusters of the past 10 years, whether it be the Transformers films, Cowboys and Aliens, Star Trek Into Darkness, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This guy does not have a good track record in terms of making good franchise films, and he just seems like such a poor fit for The Mummy as well, especially if it is his directorial debut, or in terms of his directorial debut in the blockbuster arena. I know he did a very small drama film in 2012 with Chris Pine, but that's just completely different from the Mummy in almost every single way in the film. It's not all that good. It's not bad, but it's not all that good. It's pretty mediocre and average from what I remember of it. And he also has his fingers in a lot of pies, to use a American Pie reference very, very poorly. While he's done good work on Transformers Prime, he is also working on Star Trek Discovery, on Salvation. He worked on Limitless and Scorpion and so many other TV properties that if for some reason the Dark Universe just does not take his fancy, he can just up and leave and work on whatever else he wants to work on, which evidently is exactly what happened. And then you have Chris Morgan, who has been working as a screenwriter for the Fast and Furious franchise, and that is basically the only thing he's pretty much known for. He also was the screenwriter for 47 Ronin. Yes, 47 Ronin was not some weird fever dream. It was a thing that actually existed a few years ago, and that is basically it. And the Fast and Furious franchise is still something that is going on, so it is something that he will still be working on. What you need is an up-and-coming creator who does not really have a franchise in the near future that they're still going to be working on. You do not, for example, want to get James Gunn onto this because he's going to be working on Guardians of the Galaxy and his own stuff. You need someone who will be able to dedicate their 9 to 5 every waking moment to this universe. And so as a result, you've got to make sure that it is someone who is passionate about this universe, passionate about these characters, and you need either one or two creative types who are just solely dedicated to making this thing work. They are not going to be distracted or tempted by other projects, at least until you get maybe a phase of this out of the way and you have a few of these films under your belt. So when you get an Alex Kurtzman or a Chris Morgan, someone who you have them as the universal architects of this dark universe, then they can just go away and do whatever they want if the Mummy just does not work. And I think if you have someone who's dedicated solely to making the dark universe work, then they're not going to be distracted, and they could also potentially do other things if it starts working out, but that's up to them to do. And that's also something that they need to understand later down the line. So you need someone who's going to be solely dedicated to the Dark Universe, and Alex Kurtzman and Chris Morgan clearly were not, because they were either working on television or working on the Fast and Furious. And the final thing that I think Universal could do in this proposed reboot is they could well, one of two things. You make it less producer-driven, you make it more creator-driven, which is going to be a lot easier to do, especially if you do have a lower budget. But also do not let someone like Tom Cruise completely hijack the project, which is apparently what they did. What you do is that you do not make these massive action set pieces like The Mummy had, with the plane sequence being really the only impressive set piece in the film, with the rest of the sequences being pretty tame and pretty lame, to be honest. Like, not trying to make these things rhyme, but that's completely true. There's a couple of good stunts in there, but for the action set pieces are pretty boring and trite and been there, done that. What you got to do is you've got to focus on the emotional core of these stories. You make them grand spectacles if possible in terms of production design and costuming and makeup and everything, but you make these human stories, because there's a reason that these stories such as Dracula and Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and such have been able to resonate for over a century in many of these fiction of these books cases. I mean, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was written in the late 18th century, and it is still resonating with audiences today. And the Phantom of the Opera story is almost 110 years old. These stories are retold for a reason, and it's because they speak to us on a fundamental level. Not because they are filled with action set pieces and spectacle, but because they speak to us in terms of the human condition, about hubris, about science, about man's place in the universe, about the things we do not fully understand yet. And this is fertile ground for a Universal reboot, and I want this to work, and I want this to succeed, if only so that we actually have a cinematic universe that is not entirely driven by comic books. And I love comic book universes like the MCU and the DC. No, okay, like the MCU. But what we have here is that we have an opportunity to do serialized storytelling in a very different plane, in a different genre, and I think that Universal, with such a back catalogue of content and such great Universal franchise films under their belt that are nearly a century old, that they should tap into that and use it effectively and use it correctly. And no, you're not going to get a Dracula film that's going to make $1 billion at the box office, but you don't need that. You can have your own corner of success. And if there's one thing you can learn from the horror community, is that if you do tap into something in the horror community, that is a very dedicated audience. People who turn out to mass screenings, who turn out to festivals, who will watch your film en masse if it is well received enough, if it is able to strike a chord in that community. And you may not make $1 billion from the box office, but you may make $1 billion in merchandising and DVD and Blu-ray sales and conventions and festivals and such, if you play your cards right. We are not just talking about box office receipts here, we are talking about an entire long game. And while Universal clearly had a long game in mind with casting Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe and Johnny Depp and Javier Bardem and potentially Angelina Jolie and more, then they had a long game in mind, but it was completely focused in the wrong area. And I think that Universal, if they want to try this again, which they may have to do in a couple of years' time, depending on how the other franchises go, then Universal, just give me a call and I will help you out as best I can. But you've got to start smaller, you've got to start more standalone, and you've got to start more creatively driven and not producer driven or Tom Cruise driven, because that is going to basically give you the same results as The Mummy, and doing the same thing but expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So do not be insane. Okay, folks, now we're going to be going to the listener question portion of the show. No Patreon questions for this podcast. I just didn't have time in order to get a post to let them know that I was going to be doing this. But next time we'll probably focus more specifically on Patreon questions. But for now, we're going to be doing the lightning round, where I have taken to Facebook to ask people for their lightning round questions, and I will answer them in 60 seconds or less. So I have not listened or pre-screened these questions at all. These are entirely new. And for those of you who listened to the last episode of the podcast, I'm trying to do that thing again this week where I do not or ah, and it is hurting my face quite a lot. I don't know why my body is physically so incapable of saying and ah without giving my mouth physical pain. I need to look into the science of that, so that's why I have actually been stammering and stuttering a little bit in this podcast. That could be a part of it, so I apologise for any audible discomfort that may have caused. So first question, 3, 2, 1, go. Johan Brookwasser asks, what do you think about the direction The Last Jedi is going regarding its parallels to The Empire Strikes Back? I have not been looking at every single spoiler or plot points for The Last Jedi apart from what we've seen in the trailer, so I I don't recognise any direct parallels to the Empire Strikes Back, aside from potential robot arms, the fact that it is a little bit darker, that we do have some walking machines that could be in the first act of the film. So I'm looking forward to The Last Jedi a lot because of the promotional campaign. This is actually the most hyped I've ever been for a Star Wars film since Revenge of the Sith, where it was basically early internet age or early YouTube video streaming age, where I would watch these trailers online and be blown away. This is my mouth that is completely failing to say things properly because I've not been umming and ahhing. I was blown away by those trailers. So I don't know what the parallels are going to be between The Last Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back, but I'm very looking forward to The Last Jedi. That's going to be so much fun. Okay, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Lewis Petling asks, what's your favourite director's style, as in style a director uses, e.g. Edgar Wright's editing style or Sam Raimi's camera movement? Loaded question, blimey. I love Peter Jackson's very weird and eccentric sensibilities, whether it is just his insane use of gore in Brain Dead or Dead Alive, whatever territory you're in, to his huge amount of excess in The Lord of the Rings, just for the absolute correct reasons, and that excess sort of springing over into The Hobbit in a much more family-friendly and more comical form, for better or for worse. For example, the bomber barrel sequence in The Desolation of Smaug is just that shot is a sight to behold, and I absolutely love it. But I do love Edgar Wright's style. I love his editing, and it's not just show-offy. It's always done with purpose, or in order to propel the plot forward. And the use of it in Baby Driver is just spectacular. I really hope that film gets some technical awards love at the Oscars this year. But we'll go for Edgar Wright and Peter Jackson. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Tom Bowen asks, for some of the Doctors who didn't face the Master, who would you cast as their Master, e.g. Benedict Cumberbatch for 11th's Master? I believe the only Doctors who did not encounter the Master was the first, the second, the 9th, also there's John Hurt as well, and the 11th. I will not speak for the first 2 Doctors because I just do not know actors of the age who probably could have done it. I would need to research it. I might have to pass this question and maybe address it. It's a very interesting topic. Who would you cast as Christopher Eccleston's Master and Matt Smith's Master? I would need to look at some prominent actors in 2005 and some prominent actors in 2010 who would be capable of doing that. I think for Matt Smith's Master, I think James Nesbitt would have been a really good choice. As for Christopher Eccleston's Master, I would need to look into mid-2000s, early 2000s actors who would have been interesting to play that role. But for Matt Smith's, I would go James Nesbitt, because I think he can play good and evil. He'd also make a great Doctor, but for here, we'll cast him as the Master. Okay, next question. I need to reset my timer. 3, 2, 1, go. Finley Rudd asks, if you could work on any film you wanted to, what would it be and why? I would work on any film because I would not turn down the work. But I've never worked on a big blockbuster film. I've worked on indie films, I've worked on very small projects, much smaller independent and student or very low budget affair, stuff that you probably wouldn't see in your average multiplex. So I would actually just like to work on any blockbuster that is filmed in the UK, whether it is Star Wars, whether it is something like a Marvel or DC film that is shooting in London. I do actually have a friend who worked on Captain America the First Avenger when they did a block of filming in London. I probably might need to say that again in future if I'm reviewing Captain America the First Avenger again for conflict of interest or whatever. But just working on something like that, I would like to see what a big 100 crew member film is going to be like to work on. So mainly just for the experience of it, but not a specific film. I just don't know what that is. So next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Joel Newton asks, what's your favourite or most horrible Doctor Who Christmas special? Mine is A Christmas Carol, since it's the best at capturing the magic of a Christmas, as cheesy as that sounds. That's not a cheesy answer at all, that's completely appropriate, but my favourite is actually the very first one, The Christmas Invasion. I actually think it is the only Christmas special so far that has been better than good. It's a great Christmas special. It's really well done. It's a great first contact alien invasion story, because with the Christmas Invasion, that is very much the first Doctor Who story in the modern era where they just could not deny the existence of aliens anymore. The blood control is really well done. I love David Tennant's introduction as the Doctor, and the sword fight and the Sycorax were a lot of fun. Harriet Jones was fun as well. I really like the Christmas Invasion, genuinely. That's not nostalgia, it's a genuinely great piece of modern Doctor Who, whereas the other Christmas specials are either just downright bad or just mediocre and just really average. I think Christmas Carol is unfortunately quite an average story as well. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Oscar Tidd asks, thoughts on the Infinity War trailer? Is Cap the sexiest man alive? He's definitely the sexiest man alive. Someone get that man a shield, because I will just be fangirling all over him. But for the Infinity War trailer, it was a good trailer. It was really well done, great. I liked the narration at the beginning. I like seeing more of Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther. Really looking forward to his film next year. Saw some Thanos, some Spider-Man, some Hulkbuster, which it's actually been theorized that it's Bruce Banner who's going to be in that Hulkbuster armor, because maybe he's been separated from the Hulk. Who knows? Let's see what happens. But it was a good teaser trailer, so let's see how the momentum from that can carry over to next year, and let's just see what things are going to be confirmed that we're theorizing, like the human form of the Vision, and whether or not Spider-Man dies, or if Ant-Man dies, or whatever happens. We don't know. It's all a mystery. Let's find out next year together. Okay, next question. Oh, blimey, my phone was on like 30% a moment ago, and now it's on 9%. Is the timer really eating up that much battery? Okay, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Connor Shelton asks, do you think Marvel jumped the gun releasing the Infinity War trailer, given that it's only a month since the release of Thor Ragnarok? I don't think they jumped the gun. I think what Marvel need to be doing is that now that they're releasing 3 films in a year, they need to get into a habit of promoting more than 2 films at a time, where they are going to be promoting 3 films simultaneously. They're going to be promoting Thor, Black Panther, and Infinity War. And when that first Thor Ragnarok trailer got released, they were promoting 3 films at the same time. They were promoting Thor, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. They need to get used to this cycle of multiple films a year. So, in terms of them jumping the gun, it has been a month, and everyone who wanted to see Thor Ragnarok or is really that bothered about spoilers has probably seen it already. So, I don't think they jumped the gun. I think it was the right time to release it after Justice League, but before the end of the year. I think it was a fine time. I don't know when else they could have dropped it, personally. And Justice League, that first trailer dropped a year and a half before the film's release, so they're playing it right here, I think, in my opinion at least. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Edward Sweet asks, favourite unconventional Christmas film? I often watch Batman Returns and Krampus around the festive season. If Krampus, I don't think is really an unconventional Christmas movie, apart from the fact that it's a horror black comedy. But I get the point of the question. There is, of course, Die Hard, Die Hard, the Christmas movie. I'm the very first person to figure it out. But unconventional Christmas films, I'm kind of a normal Christmas viewer. Like, I watch Elf. My girlfriend forces me to watch The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the Jim Carrey version. Joanne Noel, I just bought that on DVD this year. I'm going to be watching that. Arthur Christmas, I tend to watch the Wallace and Gromit films around Christmas. So I am more of a very traditional Christmas movie kind of guy. I like watching Jingle All the Way because I think it is one of the most underappreciated Christmas movies ever made. And no, I'm not being coy or silly about that. I think it's legitimately subversive and great. So let's go for Jingle All the Way. And it's unconventional because everyone else hates it. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Will Hay asks, what do you want to see from the 12th Doctor's regeneration? I want to see Capaldi go out with a bang, because as much as I'm looking forward to what Jodie Whittaker does, Peter Capaldi has been so underserved in his tenure that I just want to see him personally go out on a high. It will be interesting to see whether or not he regenerates alone, whether or not Bill or the First Doctor is going to be there, or potentially the Bradley Walsh companion. We don't know yet. But in terms of what I actually want from Twice Upon a Time or Twice Upon a Christmas, I forget what the story is called, I want to see Capaldi just live up to his potential as the Doctor. I know that's so much to ask from a Christmas special that's also reintroducing Bill and reintroducing David Bradley as the First Doctor, but that is what I want from the regeneration. I want Peter Capaldi's final moments to be a soaring achievement, just for Capaldi's sake and for that incarnations of the Doctor's sake. I think Capaldi completely deserves that. So next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Dom Taylor asks, which is worse, Asylum of the Daleks or Hellbent? On its own, if you were to just watch the episodes as standalone pieces of TV, Asylum of the Daleks is probably the worst. But in terms of what it does to the programme and its place in the chronology and its place in the with the baggage of the rest of the series and everything surrounding it, it's gotta be Hellbent. Hellbent completely devalues Heaven Sent. It completely devalues Capaldi's journey of that entire season. It completely drops the ball of the hybrid subplot. Hellbent is basically Stephen Moffat, for the second finale in a row, just being thrown into a sandbox of his own choosing, his own making, and just proceeding to tear it apart from the inside for no reason other than he wants to do it. And that makes it such a frustrating watch as a fan. And it's such bad storytelling, and it's such bad long-form storytelling, I should say. Whereas Asylum of the Daleks is just pure bad on its own. Hellbent does lasting damage to the programme, so kind of pick your poison there. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Alex Rooney asks, favourite musical theme from a movie? Mine has to be Rey's theme from The Force Awakens. Musical theme, blimey, that's such a big question because there's so much great stuff to choose from. You've got the Jaws theme, you've got the Jurassic Park theme, the Back to the Future theme. I think I'm going to go for the Back to the Future theme because there's very few tracks that just make me want to punch the air with my fist and just sheer triumph and joy, just like the Back to the Future theme does. And Alan Silvestri's score is just absolutely amazing during that. It's got to be the Back to the Future theme in my opinion. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Bill Aratoon asks, to you, has Moffat relied heavily on fan service from the classic series in recent years? I'm not sure. I'd actually need to look at the numbers, which of his stories had villains from the classic series when compared to other writers and other Rusty Davis and other seasons and stuff like that. I'd need to actually break down the numbers to scientifically see if there's more fan service in here. But from what I view, I actually think that there's a few moments of fan service that are just completely ill-suited, like the Return of the Great Intelligence does absolutely nothing. But there's some great use of fan service, like the return of the Mondasian first incarnation of the Cybermen. I think that's quite clever. I think bringing back John Sims' Master was really well done. Now, fan service is something that it's a double-edged sword. It can be used really effectively or really, really badly. And I think Stephen Moffat is no more guilty or no more innocent than many other writers when working on a long-running program in terms of his use of fan service. I can't really answer that properly, but in my view, he's been no better or worse than many other writers. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Reese L. Griffith asks, outside of the Car franchise, what's the worst Pixar movie? It's either A Bug's Life or Monsters, Inc. And I know that people are going to say, you hate those films, what? The wording of the question, worst Pixar movie, is, in my opinion, a little bit too strong. Weakest Pixar movie is how I would view it. I still give Monsters, Inc. a 3-star. I gave it a 3-star review. I think it is a good film. I actually think Monsters University is better than Monsters, Inc. Bug's Life has got some terrific moments and some great set pieces and stuff like that. But it's something that I don't think fully comes together as a whole. But with Monsters, Inc., it's something that feels a little bit hollow, and some of the relationships just don't ring true to me. I want to explore the universe more. I did a full 20-minute review of it on my Trilbee Reviews channel 4 years ago, so check that out. But Monsters, Inc. for me is the weakest Pixar movie outside of the Cars films. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Ellis Hawkins asks, the best use of motion capture in a film so far? Rogue One is the wrong answer. So I wouldn't have even mentioned Rogue One, but best use of motion capture in a film. You have characters like, say, Caesar in the Planet of the Apes films portrayed by the brilliant Andy Serkis, but I want to throw that out as easily being probably the best use of motion capture ever in a film. But you also have great Andy Serkis stuff such as Captain Haddock in the Adventures of Tintin film, which is terrific. You also have his work on The Lord of the Rings as Gollum, and also in the first Hobbit film. But you also can't discount actors like Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug, who was motion captioning a dragon, which is such a strange concept, and watching the footage is completely fascinating to me. But it's got to be Andy Serkis as either Gollum or Caesar. With Caesar, it's so rare that you're able to watch the entire life of a character unfold in 3 films over only a couple of years as well, and it's got to be Caesar. That is the correct answer. If Rogue One is the wrong answer, Caesar is the correct answer. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. John Smith asks, where do you think the DCEU should go next now that JL is underperforming both commercially and financially? You finish Aquaman, because that's basically in the can. You do Wonder Woman 2, potentially, depending on how quickly you can get that into production. And then you do Flashpoint / Justice League 2, or you make Justice League 2 a Flashpoint movie, and then you reboot or stop it there. That's basically what you do. Flashpoint with the DC Comics universe is essentially hand of the DCEU and out. saying, yeah, we have this story, which means you can reboot and change and things like that. I think that the DCEU needs to finish its current projects, get another Wonder Woman movie out, because that film's guaranteed to be great, or at least make a lot of money for them, because the first one was received so brilliantly well. And then you flashpoint the whole thing and get rid of everything that didn't work, keep what did work, such as Gal Gadot, such as like everything Patty Jenkins brought to the table and things like that. And then you just ditch the rest or change the rest. That's the approach you take, I think. So next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Marco Portuando says, what are your thoughts on the live-action Scooby-Doo movies? The first one I actually own on DVD, and I actually found it to be fun for what it was at the time. I have not revisited it. I remember the Nostalgia Critic review being quite scathing of it, and thinking back, yeah, that film probably wasn't that good, but it's something I've not revisited properly with modern eyes. I think I saw bits of the second film. I don't think I saw Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. I think that's the title of it. I don't think I ever saw it in its entirety. I did see the first one in its entirety multiple times. I didn't see it in cinemas, but I got it on DVD and I watched it for Christmas. So I think that the first one was okay, but I have not revisited it. So that's really all I can say about that question, I'm afraid. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Richard McGee asks, if Chris Chibnall decides to bring the Master back in Doctor Who as a male to go up against the 13th Doctor, who do you personally like to see cast as the role? My first early bet is David Easter, judged by his recent performance in Hollyoaks. These Master questions, I've not thought about these things. I don't think about the casting of the Master for some reason. I always think about the casting of the Doctor and companions, but I never think about the Master, and it's such a blind spot for me. I think with these questions, I'm going to do an actual video on this. I'm going to actually research actors who I think are capable of doing it, and I'm going to get back to you on that. I'm going to get back to you on that, Richard, and Tom, who also asked the other Master question. Let's figure this out, and we'll do a video, and we shall sort this stuff out. Okay, the next question comes from Luke Jenkins, who asks, who are your favourite stand-up comedians? I don't often watch like dedicated stand-up sets, but I do enjoy like the work of the guys from The Last Leg. I know Alex Brooker does not do stand-up comedy, but I've seen him do a set on Roast Battle because I was working on that show, and he was just hysterical. I enjoy Josh Widdicombe and Adam Hill in that show immensely as well. But in terms of other stand-up comedians, I really like Steve Hughes. I think he's really funny. Ramesh Ranganathan is great as well. I really want to listen to Mark Ellis, the guy from Movie Talk, Collider Movie Talk. I've listened to some of his stand-up on YouTube. I know he has like a full 50 to 60 minute routine that you can buy on iTunes. I've been meaning to get, but I just keep on forgetting and putting off because I don't like spending money on stuff, but it's going to happen eventually. But yeah, Ramesh Ranganathan is great as well. I think I already mentioned him. I like watching sets from Live at the Apollo because that's on Netflix, so basically just watch Live at the Apollo, and that's just some really good stuff. Okay, the final question before my voice gives out completely and I just fail to say words. Final question, 3, 2, 1, go. Carl Lane asks, if you were forced to watch one of these Doctor Who episodes, which would you watch? Love and Monsters, Hellbent, or Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS? Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS is something that I have not watched since its initial broadcasting, where I did my reaction video. I will probably watch that, but mainly out of just curiosity as to whether or not it really was as bad as I thought it was. It's something I'm going to have to probably review soon, because I'm only maybe 2 episodes away from it in terms of my Series 7 Part 2 reviews. The Cold War review is like 90% done. I just need to like finish that thing up. Then it's Hyde, then it's Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS. So I am going to have to rewatch it eventually. So it'll probably be that one. I've watched Love and Monsters a few times, and it's fascinatingly strange and weird and quite bad. And Hellbent is just, that makes me depressed whenever I watch it. So it's got to be Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, mainly because I've not watched it as many times as the others. And also because I've got to review it eventually, so I've definitely got to watch it. So let's get 2 birds with 1 stone there. So thank you so much for listening to me try and form sentences in this episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you are a patron, thank you so much for your support. Be sure to subscribe to me on YouTube at Trilbee Reviews, or on iTunes at Film Brits, just go onto your podcast app on Windows or iTunes or Android or whatever it is you kids do nowadays, and just search up Film Brits and leave a review and subscribe. That always just massively helps out. And also follow me on Twitter at Trilbee Reviews. So thank you so much, folks, and I shall hopefully speak to you next time relatively soon. It will not be like 4 weeks until the next episode again, I promise that one. So take care, guys. Enjoy your December. Stay safe on the roads. Be sure to wrap up warm, and I shall see you folks next time.